What's going on, guys? Skyhound here, also known as Geek Detective Pierce. So, I'm going to dial the clock back a few decades. Those of you who are probably young who remembered this show, I know I definitely did. I'm going to be going over two episodes of this particular 90s kids show. A dog with a big imagination. That's pretty much, I'll just summarize it in that point. That's Wishbone. I can't help but wonder how many of you guys used to remember watching the show when it aired. I remembered as a kid that I had one episode on VHS, which was the Oliver Twist episode, and on top of that, um, I had roughly around 17 to 20 books. That's how much that dog got me into reading. My very first one was actually one of the classics, which was a watered down version with some commentary by Wishbone himself. The very first classic that I read was on Romeo and Juliet. And from there, after watching the show, I eventually went to places like Walden Books, Borders. Gosh, I'm revealing my age here. But yeah, those places, that one had a lot of books, and I was quite selective of those. I had a certain number from the classics. I remembered reading Tom Sawyer, The Red Badge of Courage, Frankenstein, The Odyssey, as well as some from Wishbone Adventures. Those ones are basically the exact play by play episodes that aired when the show was on PBS. In addition to that, you also had Wishbone Mysteries and a few other books that obviously I didn't know about. But anyway, the ones I'm going to be going over are Muttketeer as well as Pop Prince of Thieves. Now, what I will mention though is that some of these episodes did get also converted into books. So Mudketeer I used to have, as well as Salty Dog. I think that was one of the episodes. Then you also had what else do I recall? There was one with regards to The Last of the Mohicans. That book was definitely one of my favorites. And they also did one with regards to I forgot what story it was on, but it was a movie that they did called Dog Days of the West. That one I know that used to be on VHS, and there was also the book for it as well. Now, for those of you guys who are curious, how many of you recall book orders? Yes, I'm going that far back, ladies and gentlemen, because I myself have gone through it. For those of you who don't know what a book order is, it is simply like a book catalog, and you have a bunch of different books from different authors, depending on what your fancy is, whatever they had at the current time. And then on the very back of it, you have a small order grid where it shows like what books were available. You can then decide, how many of those you wanted. And usually it would show on one end of the grid, how much that book cost. At the end of it, that then shows the total of, how how many of those books you wanted times the price of the book. And then you just calculate the total from there. Obviously, it's your parents, the one who actually placed that order. And sometimes, I'm pretty sure some of you guys have done this. Some of you guys were smart enough to probably have saved up, do some chores, and then buy it yourself. I know there's people that have done that. But anyway, those were also some of the ways how I got some of those books, besides going to the bookstore. Some of those book orders definitely got me into getting at least one or two of those. But in addition to those, I remembered there was also a creative studio referred to as Wishbone print tricks. As much as I want to go line by line from what I recall, that Mr. Bentley, the guy who did the voice of Wishbone, at least that's what I think his name was. Anyway, that voice actor not only lent his voice to the character, but he also did the same thing for that program. For those of you who are wondering, that creative studio allowed you to make bookmarks. You could also do certificates as well as greeting cards. And each one of those you're able to choose from the various stories that Wishbone portrayed. Anyway, now to get into the meat and potatoes of this review. First off, I'm going to be doing Muttketeer. So, as I mentioned already, with Muttketeer, that was based off of Wishbone Adventures, and Wishbone Adventures was actually, again, play by play, the exact episode that aired on the show itself. So, for those of you guys who know the story about the Three Musketeers, it's pretty straightforward. D'Artagnan wants to be a part of the Musketeers, and obviously, his attempts have been not as fruitful, if you will. He really ticks off the main three, Athos, Porthos, and Aramis. And when he's being disrespectful to them, each of them offers D'Artagnan, a duel. So he's given three duels challenges in one day. But when he does show up, that's when the Cardinals guards step in, telling those guys, hey, you guys aren't allowed to duel. And obviously, those musketeers are just telling the Cardinals, we're not going to listen to a bunch of lackeys who obviously don't know how to protect the country of France. And I'm going to paraphrase just a little bit and also interject from the 1993 Walt Disney take of the Three Musketeers. When they're facing the Cardinals guards, it is Athos who states that there's three of us and five of them. But then D'Artagnan comes in and says, actually, you're wrong. There's actually four of us. But Athos points out, you're not one of us. You're not even a musketeer. And I'm just going to be quoting from the film itself. I forget how it was done in Wishbone, but D'Artagnan is simply telling Athos, I may not be a musketeer like you guys. I may not wear the tunic, but I have the heart of one. And he eventually does prove it as the fight breaks out. So, getting back into this, I pretty much kind of got through some of the main story of the Three Musketeers itself in quick summary. But on the episode itself, um, David tells Joe and Sam, "Hey, you guys, remember there's actually a program that our I think it was their geometry teacher wanted to show them, and so they go back in. Wishbone wants to be part of it, but obviously the door closes, and well, he's not allowed to get in. The janitor does try to like do his job, but he's telling Wishbone, shoo, get out of the way, you're not allowed in here. And basically, some of the main challenges that D'Artagnan faces is not just with Cardinal Richelieu as well as the Musketeers trying to prove himself, but he also runs into Milady de Winter. Now she is very conniving and also a murderer. As the story points out, she was branded with the fleur de lis. For those of you guys who know the background regarding the fleur de lis, it is usually given to criminals who are to be executed for murder, which she is. She is also in league with Cardinal Richelieu, the main antagonist of the story. And the way how this plays out on the episode is that Milady de Winter is actually given a carte blanche. And obviously, the story does kind of explain, what it is. Simply put, a kind of like a free pass, if you will, allowing them to do whatever they want. It kind of grants pardon to the person that has it. D'Artagnan learns about this, goes back to the Musketeer headquarters, and notifies Athos, Porthos, and Aramis, who Milady de Winter is, why she's around, why she's in league with Cardinal Richelieu, as well as the carte blanche. So those three eventually manage to take it from her. And, Cardinal Richelieu tries a few times to have D'Artagnan on his side, but D'Artagnan outright refuses. Eventually, when the carte blanche does get into his possession, he does use it against the cardinal. As a result, he then becomes, I don't remember the rank, the military rank he was given, but I think it was either lieutenant or admiral of the king's army as a result. Back to the episode at hand, Wishbone does manage to eventually get in after Joe, Sam, and David find out that the computer is not working because the teacher finds out that the lab rat escaped. I forgot the rat's name, but he was chewing on the cables. The janitor is also trying to get the rat, but fails to do so. But when Wishbone gets inside, they're like, what is he even doing here? And so all of them are trying to find that rat, and Wishbone finds out that the rat manages to get into the science lab. And he finds a manner of trying to trap it by using a box with clever timing. And he just waits for the rat to get at the right spot and then traps it, just like that. That's pretty much the rough summary of that episode. The second part actually is on Paw Prince of Thieves. If the title isn't clear enough, that is basically regarding Robin Hood. Before I go into that episode, I also want to point out that if you guys remember back in your childhood days, you likely have watched Disney's take on it, the animated version of it. So that one kind of gives a rough summary of the story itself. So I'll try to make it as quick as I can. But anyway, before I go any further, do hit the like and subscribe button for any more of my videos and takes. If you like it, do try to share whatever takes I've had, with others to try and, bring up my views and subscriptions. But anyway, let's get into the quick summary of Paw Prince of Thieves. So with this one, Wishbone finds out that food is being tossed out. His owner, Joe, finds out that the lunch lady was ordered by the superintendent to so-called he's the one who actually is the one that told her to toss out the food. She doesn't want to toss it, and Joe learns that she's giving it to a homeless shelter for the food bank for those who weren't able to buy food, because she knows, wasting good food that is still usable for people to eat is a waste. And when the superintendent finds wind of it, Joe essentially is now a part of the whole scheme. When Wanda, his neighbor, is actually part of the food shelter efforts, she obviously is asking Joe and the lunch lady, where'd you guys get it from? When she finds out that the food was being taken from the school, Wanda herself is actually a bit appalled at first, but then Joe is the one who decides to sign for the donation. As soon as the superintendent finds out about it, that's when things take a turn for the worst. Wishbone obviously understands the story of Robin Hood, and you know he is basically the character in this case. The sheriff of Nottingham, of course, is definitely one who's taking what little the poor have for himself, and obviously he dislikes Robin Hood for obvious reasons. The only way to drag him out is through a tournament of sorts, archery. He knows that Robin Hood isn't able to resist it, and Robin obviously has the hots for Maid Marian. When she finds out that he is actually in a certain disguise, that's when obviously um, the ruse is up. They have to retreat, and then he's ordered to actually either surrender himself or Maid Marian is out of the picture. His friends obviously try to talk him out of it, but obviously he decides to go. And when the fight does break out, that's when the king returns, and obviously order does get restored. And Robin decides to offer his services to the king as recompense. So Joe is then told to either stand down or get expelled after the superintendent finds out that he had signed on the food donation. So he does give a speech out in the playground, and the kids eventually rebel and decide not to get any food. When Joe's mother gets wind of it because of the superintendent, obviously the mom's proud because he's standing up for what he believes in. He knows what he's doing is right, despite what the superintendent is saying. And obviously, an argument breaks out between Joe's mom, the superintendent, and then when the principal comes back and she hears, the whole thing, she's like, "All right, that's enough. I've heard enough." So when the lunch lady comes back, she reinstates the lunch lady's position. Lunch then gets resumed, and then she gives the dirty look to the superintendent. As for you, meet me in my office. We have some stuff to discuss. And pretty much you can easily tell from that the superintendent is pretty much going to lose his job. Anyway, that's just my rough summary of Paw Prince of Thieves. I know that one probably is a little bit shorter compared to my take on Muttketeer. But anyway, if you guys liked this, do hit the like and subscribe button. Feel free to share this. And before I leave on this, I am curious. For those of you who have watched some episodes or even owned some of the books back then, what were your favorite stories when you watched it, or what were your favorite episodes? Do leave them down in the comments down below. But with that said, this now brings this review to a close. I have been Skyhound, also known as Geek Detective Pierce. Hope you guys enjoyed this double dose of Wishbone. Stay safe, stay sane, and as always, stay humble.